maybe it's just me, but I didn't used to see mechanics like this back in the day. Back when I was playing 3rd edition, when I was playing 4th edition, heck, like the first half of when I was playing 5th edition. I just didn't see these. And now it feels like they're becoming more common, or maybe I'm just becoming more aware of them. In either case, I like them. Bond mechanics is the general term that I use for any kind of mechanic that codifies relationships between characters. I like bond mechanics. I think bonds are super cool. And of course, the kind of showcase game for this type of mechanic is Fabula Ultima, where bonds are a kind of a major tool in how the characters interact with each other and how they can assist each other. I believe it is the way to do assistance to someone else's action, like aside from group roles, which is a different thing. You can assist an action by spending a Fabula point and adding a value to their role equal to your bond with that character. I think that's super cool. And the bonds are tied to like specific emotions, and the more emotions you have associated with that character, or it doesn't even have to be a character, it can be like a place, an idea, whatever. The more emotions you have, the stronger the bond is. And I think that's super cool, as like, you get to know someone more and your relationship with them becomes more nuanced and more complicated as new emotions get introduced to this bond. I think this is really neat. But even like aside from the way Fabula does it, which is obviously quite well thought out, and I think is quite excellent. I think that comes from Ryotama. I've actually never read Ryotama, but I understand Fabula Ultima is based on it, and this feels like a mechanic that would be from that. But even aside from like the specifics of how Fabula Ultima does bonds, I like bond systems in general. A part of the game that says like who you have relationships with and what kind of relationships those are, maybe how strong they are, that kind of thing. I think it's just really neat. I think it's a fantastic and very simple way to introduce role-playing mechanics and to sort of acknowledge that relationships between characters are like 90% of what most stories are about. If you think about it, nearly every good story is about the characters and their interactions with each other and their relationships and that sort of push-pull of like, wants and attitudes and, conflicts between each other and whatnot, both between like allies and enemies, friends and rivals, etc. It's like, that's what storytelling really is. And so I think it's neat that RPGs are starting to acknowledge that and incorporate it into the game mechanics. We are gamifying storytelling, which is so cool. And that's kind of what I want to do for Code World as I'm developing it. Like, I knew immediately I want a bond system in this game, because what I'm trying to do with Code World is have it be gamified storytelling within a specific genre. In this case, the sort of like action hero genre. But I still know that even in like the action hero genre, where like you think, when you think of the genre, you think of like, big bombastic moves and, crazy stunts and cool powers and special abilities and, like larger than life characters. But even so, the best stories, even action stories, are about relationships between the characters. And so I think a bond system is sort of like even the minimum step that you can take in order to facilitate that in your RPG. And I think any game that has like a decent bond system sort of immediately elevated above the sort of standard D&D approach to the game, which is that like the game is about combat and you can do role playing in between or during that if you like. But like the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons kind of always have been about fighting because it was born of a war game, and so that's to be expected. But I think games that don't want to necessarily be like that, and they want to be more about storytelling and, dare I say, role-playing, which are two different things, I think those games would do well to have some sort of relationship-based mechanic. I think Fabula Ultima does a fantastic job, as I've already mentioned, but it's not the only way to approach it. You can have like a list of friends and a list of rivals, and maybe like you gain special benefits when operating with a friend, and you gain benefits when working against a rival, that kind of thing. Blades in the Dark doesn't so much like explicitly call out like, oh, here's the list of people that you know. I mean, it does have like contacts, but those are NPC contacts, and I think that's kind of different. But it does have mechanics for one of the XP triggers for the crew is if there was conflict within, like, between characters. If the crew was conflicted with itself, basically, like you had, some sort of tension, some friction between characters, you actually get XP for it. The game rewards that kind of behavior because that's really interesting storytelling. And it's specifically the kind of storytelling that game is trying to push players towards. I think that's super cool. It's not a bond system per se, but it is another mechanic that cares about character relationships. Even though you are allies, you are individuals with your own wants and needs, and you're going to come into conflict. And it's really interesting when that happens, particularly between protagonists. And so the game is going to directly reward players for doing that. And I think that's just excellent. I think that's fantastic design. Any game that actively encourages the kind of behavior that, like, the genre that it is evoking, like, it actively encourages players to engage with that kind of character building and world building and scene building even. I think that's just really excellent design, and nearly all of my favorite games do that. Nearly all. I would say that D&D 4th edition, despite being my favorite version of D&D, doesn't necessarily, like, it doesn't do it in the same way because the genre that it's after is, like, heroic fantasy characters, epic fantasy heroes, that kind of thing. Like, there isn't really so much of that. The game is not about interpersonal conflict. It's not really about relationship building either. Because it's not about that, it doesn't really have any mechanics to deal with that. And so I think there's a little bit something lost there. I've spent some time recently thinking about, like, what would I do if I were rewriting 4th edition? If I was in charge of updating 4th edition to a modern RPG. And one of the things that I would do is I would probably introduce some sort of bond system, because I think it's regardless of what specific mechanics you do, bonds are really easy to incorporate into a game and make them work well. And it directly encourages players to play off of those bonds, to have their characters have more meaningful relationships than just, I am the artillery and this is my tank and this is my healer. That kind of, that is a very surface level kind of utility based relationship, and it's not like, oh, well, I'm an aristocrat and this guy's lowborn, and so we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and I kind of look down on him, but at the same time I respect his skill. That's a sort of, like, more complicated, more nuanced relationship that characters can have, and you can do that, but the game does not encourage it. And I think that games that mechanically encourage that sort of role-playing, that sort of character building, are just superior designs to those that do not. And that's an opinion. That's not absolute objective fact, but it is something that I have come to realize kind of a long time ago. And my opinion on this has not changed in a long time. So I feel like it's not going to. I will pretty much always prefer games that have those kinds of mechanics over those that do not. Does Monster of the Week have... I want to say some aspects of Monster of the Week do. I know that there are Powered by the Apocalypse games that have more, like, explicit bond type mechanics. The Land of Eam is a game that I've been playing recently. It's not Powered by the Apocalypse, just I jumped to that in my brain, so I'm going to talk about it now. The Land of Eam has a mechanic for one of the classes. The class is called the Loyal Chum, and in character creation, you pick one of the other characters to be your best chum. It's like your best friend. And so you get special benefits for, like, protecting or helping or, interacting with that character. And I thought that was super cool. I would like to see more of that. I think that's a little undercooked, to be honest. But, like, if every class had something kind of like that, I think that would be just aces. So anyways, yeah, bond systems, very easy to incorporate because they tend to be kind of simple, and it's easy to imagine the kinds of, like, incentives and benefits and things that it can interact with in most systems. I think most systems you could practically write up a bond system and just sort of like drop it right in, just plug and play it, if they don't already have one. So, not necessarily recommending that you do so, but I'm saying you could. That's how powerful and versatile and easy this kind of mechanic is. So on the one hand, it feels like they're kind of a new thing. I feel like not a lot of older RPGs have this sort of mechanic. But on the other hand, it's a little surprising that they don't. Or it's surprising that I haven't seen them before. Because there's that possibility too.